Now for our PIX panel, joining me this week, PIX 11 political reporters Henry Rosoff and Ayana and Jeff Colton from City and State New York. So good to have all three of you here this morning. And I do want to begin with what is happening with NYCHA. What a bombshell last week, right? The arsenic scare turning out to be a testing error in the lab. And now there's a search for a new CEO. So, Henry, you were covering a lot of this last week. Tell us about the mistrust that's happening right now that public housing residents are experiencing.
Well, let's just think about those two things that you mentioned. In theory, the city says they are unrelated. The CEO moving to just being the chairman, Gregory Russ, that is, and this arsenic water mess that we had at NYCHA, unrelated. That being said, none of the residents I'm speaking with believe that. They don't know why the water actually was bubbly and discolored to begin with, because that was the reason for this initial testing. The mistrust runs deep. Many, including 35, suing the city and the mayor for $10 million, and that number of litigants is growing, want to know why the bottled water service has been discontinued when they don't still trust the water despite this results.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to kind of say it had nothing to do with that. The timing is just suspect, right? So now comes the search for the next CEO. Some would say that Greg Russ was never the right choice to begin with because he split his time. So, Ayana, what should the mayor be looking for in the next leader of NYCHA?
He's certainly going to look for an effective manager. NYCHA has been plagued with issues not just for months or years, but really for decades. So you need someone who's willing to come in and take on this ginormous, enormous task of looking at this agency that has been plagued with issues over years. It's not just arsenic in the water. It's been lead paint. It's been lack of heat and hot water in the winter. So someone who can come in and effectively deal with this agency, and also there have been serious issues in terms of people who work for NYCHA taking advantage of and abusing the system. So someone who's going to deal with all of that in an effective way and effectively use the taxpayer money for this public housing that hundreds of thousands of people rely on.
Yeah, and there's lawsuits, right? Henry mentioned these lawsuits following the arsenic scare. We don't know how many people are actually going to sign on, Jeff, right? So how far can the legal action actually go?
It's always hard to say with this. I can understand an absolute frustration with this latest incident and with NYCHA over the past many years. I will say one thing, that Greg Russ was never Mayor Adams' guy. He was a de Blasio guy. And, look, Adams has, throughout his career, been somebody who pays attention to NYCHA, visits the housing complexes. I'm going to try to be optimistic for the residents of NYCHA that maybe some change will be good here. But it's hard to keep up that optimism based on the history that we've seen. And, of course, this latest arsenic maybe incident.
And some would say that the next person has to be someone who's local and really understands NYCHA, not public housing that we see across the country, but NYCHA, because it's really an anomaly.
Yeah, I mean, Dan, I don't know if you can work remotely when you are trying to run NYCHA, which is what Greg Russ was doing. So certainly someone who's hands-on and on the grounds is what I'm expecting the mayor to go for.
We shall see. But, we haven't had a chance, guys, to discuss the recent poll results that we did here at PIX 11 Emerson College in the race for governor. So take a look here. Governor Hochul with a strong lead over Congressman Zeldin. But with still 7 weeks to go in a race, there is a lot, as we know, that can happen. So, Henry, big takeaway from these kinds of numbers here.
Well, and I'll add that since we unveiled our poll about 10 days ago or so, there's been other polling that has backed up that double-digit lead, so that polling seems quite accurate and quite on trend. Abortion, really an animating factor in this poll. 80% of New Yorkers say they would approve of abortion up to and including the third trimester. 50% of New Yorkers would say only if the health of the mother is at risk. That's the current state of the law. Congressman Zeldin, running on the Republican line, really does seem to be out of step on that issue, but is talking a lot about the economy. And economy is technically the #1 issue, but abortion sort of animating this race, or at least bringing the passions to the fore.
Yeah, and it certainly seemed like Lee Zeldin was betting for a large portion of his campaign that crime would be the issue that really drives New Yorkers to the polls, that would drive up his support. And it seems like it just hasn't really, come together for Lee Zeldin in terms of getting support from voters based on his stance on crime and the state's bail laws.
And, Jeff, there's a lot of talk right now and a lot of pressure from Zeldin to debate and when it comes to Governor Kathy Hochul. We put the invitation out there. What are your thoughts on the fact of these debates? How many should take place, and do you think she'll actually do it?
Look, I would love to see debates. Of course, I would love to see the two talking about issues. Fact is, Kathy Hochul is a Democrat in a heavily Democratic state. There's a 2-to-1 voter advantage, Democrats for Republicans. Look, Zeldin has the Republicans in his hand. He has a actually a significant advantage with independent voters as well. But there's just so many Democrats in this state, and they're probably going to come out and vote in November. So I think Kathy Hochul is taking it, maybe playing it very safe. And look, debates are always an opportunity where you can mess up.
Right.
So Governor Cuomo did tend to do two, even with the advantages that Jeff mentioned. The recent precedent is two. So in fairness to Congressman Zeldin, his ask is not unreasonable.
Yeah, and our invitation still stands. And briefly here, I want to get this in. Last week, Mayor Adams said New York City's right to shelter policy needed to be reassessed because of the influx of migrants, right? These buses are still arriving. The city's reaching a point where it cannot handle the amount of people coming to the city, more than 11,000. Legally, Ayana, what can the mayor do? We only have 30 seconds here because right now the city is required to provide shelters.
I think what the mayor really needs to do and what he's been doing is calling for federal intervention, federal help, federal resources. This is not just a New York City issue. I mean, when you see migrants being flown from Florida to Martha's Vineyard, it's clear that there needs to be a step in from the president or from someone in the federal government to coordinate this issue. New York City certainly needs help. We could certainly have better organization here, but federal intervention seems to be what's really needed.
Yeah, and when the mayor was right here on PIX on Politics, I did ask him that, and he was pressing for that federal help. Henry, Ayana, Jeff, thank you all for your insights and for being here this week, everybody. And